Okay, we're going to have a look at Dutch still life painting and how much it's actually influenced the work of contemporary artists. In particular, we're looking at Audrey Flack, an American painter from the late part of the 20th century, and an Australian sculptor called Ricky Swallow. So today's lesson is about Audrey Flack, and tomorrow's lesson will be Ricky Swallow. Now, essentially, we've already learned over and over again that there are three main aspects of the Dutch still life painting that we need to always remember. These three things are that their paintings were used as symbols of their Protestant faith, and the objects in each painting were symbolic in different facets of those sorts of things. Also, the artwork as an object itself was a symbol of the owner's wealth and status in society. And for the artist, the painting or the object of the painting was a vehicle for them to be able to demonstrate their great technical skill. Now, keeping those things in mind, we now need to jump forward into the 20th century. We've looked at the work of all these Dutch painters. In particular, we've looked at the self-portrait with Vanitas symbols by David Bailey. And we know that the artist in this particular painting from the 17th century tells his own story, his own narrative about his life by using objects symbolically. Not dissimilar to David Bailey, we have the work of Audrey Flack. She's the lady there on the left-hand side, and she's an American photorealist painter. Now, she, as well as Ricky Swallow and Yasumasa Morimura, all gain inspiration for their art making from the Baroque period, and they use it for different reasons. They appropriate the technical aspects of the traditional works, and they recontextualize the concepts of the past masters to represent their own narratives. And each artist explores basic themes of their own personal identity, cultural identity, and the importance of past art, and focus on highly realistic technical practice in the creation of their work. So we move across now to Audrey Flack's work. Before I actually get into discussing her work in detail, what I'm trying to say is that when you look at your knowledge of traditional Protestant Dutch still life painting and how we've just gone through those 3 points of each object in those paintings were full of symbolic meaning in reference to their faith. The object itself had a symbolic meaning culturally. In their case, it was their social status. And it was a vehicle for the artist to communicate to their audience their great technical skill. Some of those things, in one way, shape, or form, are also brought across into the 20th century. So at the moment, I'm going to show you 3 different artworks by Audrey Flack. The first one you're seeing here on screen is an artwork called Marilyn Vanitas, which is one of 3 artworks which have the Vanitas theme that were painted as a set or a series by Audrey Flack, which have very significant personal meaning to her and about her. The next artwork here is called Wheel of Fortune, and the final work that we want to refer to here is World War II Vanitas. Now, this particular artwork is the first artwork of the series that she made, followed by her work Marilyn Vanitas, and finally the Wheel of Fortune being the third work. Now, each particular artwork has a personal narrative. There are 4 main aspects for looking at her work. We know that, and this is not one of the 4, but we know that just by physically looking at each one of these artworks, that the use of the Dutch Vanitas style is very evident. We've got choices of particular objects in the artworks that each have very clear references to that specific painting genre. In this particular artwork, Marilyn Vanitas, we see references to the candle, the clock, the hourglass, and the calendar, all about the passage of time. There's also beautiful flowers We also have luxurious cloth, jewelry, makeup, and fruit, which often reference the ideas about those things about life and transient and life passing. So in this particular artwork, called Marilyn Vanitas, a lot of people think it's a painting about Marilyn Monroe. It is to an extent, but it's not the focus of this work by Audrey Flack. For Audrey Flack, the focus of this particular artwork is a personal narrative. So whereas the Dutch used the narrative of their artworks, the objects symbolically in their works, to tell the story of their faith, Audrey Flack is using the objects symbolically in her work to share with the audience the narrative of her life. This particular artwork deals with two aspects. One, her life as an artist, and in particular, her life as a leading feminist artist in the late 70s. And the second aspect, what it means to be female. Let's concentrate first on this aspect of being an artist. Audrey Flack was painting with predominantly male artists because, let's face it, all through history and only into the latter part of the 20th century, men have always dominated art. Female artists really started to become popular from the 1970s onward and started to be recognised equally amongst their male peers. Audrey Flack was one of those pioneering female artists. If you look back through history, yes, there are other women artists who have notoriety, but it's really in the 1970s that a group of women started to really push forward to get acknowledgement for their artistic abilities and craft out a career as artists in their own right. We see that in this particular artwork symbolically presented. In particular, center, floating in front of this particular painting, is the paintbrush with paint dripping off the work. Off the brush, I mean. So the artist is telling us here about the act of making art, that this also is a painting, not a photograph, but it's about her as an artist creating an artwork. Every single object in this work symbolically relates to her personally. It is a story about her life. Centrally in this work, we have the photograph of herself and her brother as young children, and on either side of her we see Marilyn Monroe and the reflection of her in the mirror. As I said earlier, we have typical traditional Vanitas symbols in the artwork, being the flowers, the fruit, and the objects which measure time. Also in this work, we can see the references to beauty, to being female, and the expectations of what comes with that. Interestingly enough, we've got other evidence in here that actually points to the fact that this is about Marilyn, sorry, not about Marilyn, but about Audrey Flack herself. This painting was done in 1977, yet the actual candle is still alight, which would suggest that this is really about Audrey Flack because she's not dead yet. And 1977, Marilyn Monroe was well and truly no longer living. The other thing that's quite interesting in this painting is the blue Dutch mug in the centre foreground, which is a direct reference to the fact that Audrey Flack is referencing the traditions of art. In so doing, she's making sure that her audience realise the significance that she is giving to the importance of traditional art being used and necessary for artists of contemporary times to be informed and also recontextualize to make comments about their current world. And that's what she's doing here with this particular work. She's talking about the role of being female, what that actually means, the ideas about the culture in which she's living, where indulgence and beauty and excess, the idea of transforming yourself through applying makeup, also the pressures on you being female to actually make yourself an improved version of yourself by applying makeup. Also the other aspects of being female, desiring to be more beautiful, the idea about that being futile because you will one day age and that no longer will be evident on your face, and emancipation, fighting for freedom from these shackles. If we move to the next artwork, and I want to look at this World War II painting, we see some really significant symbols in this work too. This particular work has a lot of information that goes with it, and I'm going to read bits and pieces from an article that I found on her. Just prior to that, if we go back to Wheel of Fortune, which is the last work in the series, this artwork I don't know as much about, but you can see in this work that there are definite references, again, to her own personal life. Where in Marilyn Vanitas, it was about herself growing into a woman, the expectations of being female, as well as being a work about a female artist breaking through and what it is to be a female artist. This particular artwork is also showing yet another facet of Audrey Flack's personal life. Now, this artwork is called Wheel of Fortune, as I said, but it's more of a painting about her as a mother, and in the far left-hand corner is a painting or a picture of her daughter. Now, her daughter had autism, so this artwork is dealing with the Wheel of Fortune. You roll the dice, and sometimes you're lucky and sometimes you're not. Now, I don't know how she feels about the incidence of autism, and back in the 1970s, I don't think autism would have anywhere near as prevalent as we see now. But we can see here that she's making quite a comment about the chances of having an autistic child then, and the impact that's possibly had on her life. There is nothing to suggest that it's been a negative. Everything in this work is still sumptuous and beautiful. And of course, I suppose you could say the skull may relate possibly to her concern about her own mortality, who will look after a daughter when she passes on herself, so on and so forth. You can see the work, in the work, the traditional symbols of Vanitas with the hourglass, the candle, the calendar, and these things yet again reference the passage of time. And of course, we've got the skull as well. Interestingly, each one of the pieces of fruit in this particular work are luscious and really fresh. There's no evidence of decay anywhere in this painting except for the skull. Now, I just want to move across to a piece of information that belongs with this painting here, which is the very first of the series, called World War II Vanitas. So far we've talked about Marilyn Vanitas being a painting about her desire to communicate with the audience, about the role of female artists and the importance of that, and being considered an artist in her own right as a woman, as well as what it is to be female. You don't have to be butch. Look at all these beautiful things. The second work that we've talked about reflects yet another aspect of a self-portrait. These objects reflect her life, and in particular the incidence of her daughter being diagnosed with autism. Now, this last artwork, which happens to be the first in the series, is about her Jewish heritage. And I want to read to you from a particular piece of literature that I found when I was actually researching this. Okay, so if we have a look at this particular piece of literature, it comes from Cleveland State University. It was written by Samantha Baskin Cleveland. And this is essentially about that last artwork that I just showed you, World War II. And it's about her exploration of her Jewish heritage from both a religious and historical viewpoint. So now we're starting to see yet another facet of her personality. And it's this quote that I find very interesting in terms of understanding the artist herself and how she's grappling with what it would have been like to be a teenager in post-World War II America, and also the ongoing ramifications in America of growing up Jewish. Anyway, this is the story. My brother was drafted out of the Reserve Officers Training Corps and within 2 months, with almost no basic training, was sent to fight in the Battle of the Bulge. It was a massacre. He was one of only 2 soldiers to survive in his battalion. He was one of the first foot soldiers to liberate Hitler's summer home. While other soldiers were ransacking the place, my brother found a hidden wall in one of Hitler's windowsills which contained his personal copy of Mein Kampf, which translates as My Struggle, his personal photograph album with pictures of Hitler, Eva Braun, Albert Speer, and other friends, a gold necklace with rubies, which was probably Eva Braun's, and a book of Hitler's original watercolours. Hitler considered himself an artist. When my brother came home, he dropped them on my bed, along with German helmets, swastikas, hand grenades, and a Luger pistol, and left them there. I grew up studying Hitler's watercolours, which I'm reluctant to admit that I liked. That led to my need to deal with the subject of Hitler and the Holocaust in order to understand the depravity human beings can sink to. I continued to read everything about Hitler. Okay, so if we read this particular quote by Audrey Flack, we quickly start to recognise that the artwork that I've just shown you, World War II, is more than just a story about her own Jewish heritage. It starts to be also an exploration by her dealing with the difficult concept of why humans can treat other people so badly. And it's the idea of putting people into a particular, under a particular label, labeling them as other, therefore distancing yourself from them, therefore makes it more legitimate that people can be treated harshly and horribly. So we start to see that this artwork symbolically is dealing with some more complex issues beyond her trying to understand her own Jewish heritage and celebrate that Jewish heritage. I just want to point out a few things to you. You probably can't see with the mouse just here. Down the very bottom here on the right hand side where the mouse is moving around, there is a rainbow. I want to point out also the butterfly just here. Both of these objects are traditionally known, one in the Jewish Torah or the Old Testament of the Bible. We know that the rainbow represents hope and a promise from God that he'll never flood the earth again. And the butterfly is connected to the New Testament and is seen in Dutch still life painting as a symbol of resurrection and hope. And it's been included in this particular artwork as a sign of hope for the Jewish people as well. Anyway, let's go back to the piece of writing that I was referring to. So in the mid-70s, Flack started the large-scale still lifes, for which she is well recognised. She composed 3 canvases. They're all 2.5 approximately 2.5 metres squared each. And we know also from what I've already said that she draws her inspiration from these allegorical still lifes from the Dutch still life period. What she's done, if we're talking about her material practice, she creates in her own studio these little still lives and then she photographs them in her studio. Then these pictures are actually painted with acrylic underneath, and she also uses an airbrush and oil paint in the end. But more interestingly enough, at this particular time, she decides to use a slide projector to project these images up onto the canvas. Now, some people would think that that was cheating, but she wasn't. She was using technology to aid her art practice, or her art making practice. Now, it goes on to say here, the best known of the group is Marilyn Vanitas, which is a painting that employs lush, intense colours and a high gloss surface to examine stereotypes of womanhood. These were the stereotypes as a child that she was exposed to, and these are the stereotypes that she's probably trying to break free of that we see in the artwork Marilyn Vanitas. The stereotype that we see of Marilyn Monroe. She's your sex symbol. This is what you should be aspiring to, young ladies. You're there for the pleasure of the male gaze. So this artwork is quite interesting in that we come to terms with an artist who wants to throw off the shackles of a patriarchal art world, and she's also talking about the shackles for a woman in the 1970s in a patriarchal world that wants women to behave and in a particular way. Throughout that particular painting, as I've already said, there are specific well-known Vanitas references, and they say here, moreover, the image also evokes the artist's own vulnerability. She's showing you exactly how she feels. She's inviting the audience in to unpack the symbols that are in the work. Less well known is the artist's exceptionally powerful and personal first Vanitas painting, which is World War II. So if we look at that artwork, the painting represents an array of pretty objects in front of a reproduction of the iconic, devastating picture by life photographer Margaret Burke White of the liberation of the Buchenwald concentration camp in 1945. It's been captured in black and white, and the exhausted, stunned prisoners behind the barbed wire fence in Flack's canvas contrast with these gorgeous, rich, glowing colours of the pastries that are displayed on a shiny embossed silver platter. What this painting does, it incorporates a part of the well-known photograph by Buchenwald, and also we see the candle dripping red wax like blood. There's a red rose, a blue goblet, and a shiny strand of pearls. All these things also appear in Marilyn Vanitas. But here's where we refer to this butterfly again. There's a butterfly lighting on a delicate china cup. There's a timepiece, a Star of David from Flack's own personal keychain, and some of these objects are placed on an open page of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel's introduction to Roman Vishniak's volume of 31 pre-war photographs, which gave us an overview of the life of the Polish Jews. Now, the interesting thing is also what she does is she shows us, and if I quickly just go back to PowerPoint, she shows us down the bottom here, this image, there's an extract just down here on the painting. And this is the extract that they're referring to. So, it says here, outwardly they may have looked plagued by the misery and humiliation in which they lived, but inwardly they bore the rich sorrow of the world and the noble vision of redemption for all men and all beings. For man is not alone in this world. Despair does not exist at all, said Rabbi Nahum of Bratslav, a Hasidic leader. Do not fear, dear child. God is with you, in you, around you. Even in the nethermost pit, one can try to come closer to God. The word bad never came to their lips. Disasters did not frighten them. You can take everything from me, the pillow from under my head, my house, but you cannot take God from my heart. Flack explains why she amalgamated such diverse elements in her painting. Her idea was to tell a story, an allegory of war, of life, and the ultimate breakdown of humanity, which was the Nazis. She wanted to create a work of violent contrasts of good and evil. Could there be a more violent contrast than that? So if we quickly look again at that painting, we see these incredibly beautiful contrasts between this luscious fruit and the pastries just here alongside her choice to keep the image black and white. But at the same time, this incredible contrast does not block out the hope that these people have. Okay. We have a whole range of information here that you can make reference to yourself. And I've already said that the first rainbow was an assertion of God's presence after the flood. It's full of specific Jewish references, as well as making references to these differences between good and evil. So how significant is traditional still life artworks to the art making practice of Audrey Flack? It's very significant. She does several different things that correlate exactly with what the Dutch did. She adopts the stylistic approach of communicating her messages symbolically as allegories, which are stories or narratives with a moral. And her morals are dealing with the role of the artist, the role of a woman, the external pressures on women, the issues to deal with evilness of mankind and the depravity of humankind, and also how we as individuals cope with children with particular special needs. She also, secondly, uses her work to address the role of the artist, and in particular, she addresses the injustices that female artists fought against in the early feminist period of the 1970s. Thirdly, she uses the painting itself as an object to reintroduce the importance of representational imagery in a time in art history where abstraction was the preferred style of art making. Flack also uses her artwork as a vehicle to comment on new forms of technology that could be used to aid the creation of art making. She uses the overhead projector or slide projector in order to help her with her art making. Lastly, Flack encourages her audience to play an active role in the process of constructing meaning in her artworks. Yes, the artworks are self-portraits of the artist, but they are also portraits of the culture from which Flack herself belongs. And that also includes the culture from which you belong.